All right, the recording is going. All right, great. All right, so I see a lot of familiar faces that have been already in one or two of the sessions. If not, this is just kind of a simple little bit of administrative housekeeping. If we're getting a lot of feedback or noise coming through on your microphone, I may hit the mute button. And generally everyone is muted until you go to speak. So if you're saying something and no one's hearing you, you may have to unmute yourself. On the other hand, we also have a chat function. It's on the side, and that's the easiest way to kind of just get random thoughts out or take notes, or if you have a question while someone else is talking. Let's see, let's hit admit all. We've been having about 50 or 70 people in each session, so you can imagine it gets a little busy in here. So that chat function is super helpful, so we're not all talking over one another. So with that being said, I'm going to hand this over to Kevin. I just recently met Kevin online, I'd say over the last year, I believe it was, and I've been really enjoying watching his journey through kite making and kite building. So there you go, Kevin. It is all yours.
Thank you, Nick. So my name is Kevin Coleman. I've only been making kites for about a year. In fact, I started right after the last kite conference last year. No, maybe a little before that. I was inspired by one of Ron Gibbion's videos, and that's when I started. But what I'm going to talk about today is the evolution, or the place I've gotten to based on the last conference for making large appliques using large full-size printed templates. I heard people talking about transferring their design to paper so that they could cut it out, but there is a way you can do it where you don't have to transfer anything. You can just print it in a way that it works. And in this video, I'm also going to go through how I use the templates for cutting. And at the end, the third part, the sewing, I'm going to talk a little bit really to people who are new to kite making and new to template making about some things I've learned about sewing, but I'm certainly not going to try and do a full sewing presentation. Ron Gibbion's already done an excellent one, and so we'll work with that. So the templates, just for reference, the kind of templates I'm talking about are making large paper templates like this. You probably can't see that all at once. But this is how I go about making kites with images like the one I've got behind me here. Okay, I'm going to talk about how I make the templates and then how I break them down and what the approach is to keeping them manageable as I work with them. So I'm going to start by presenting a presentation. Okay, share, make this play. So I'm hoping you can all see this. And I realize now when I present this, I don't see because it's full screen, I don't see the conference anymore. So Nick, if something comes up, let me know.
Will do.
This actually, I've been making a series of 3 videos. The first one, this is the video that's complete. I've got a second one, which is in progress, and the third one is still to come. So these materials were from that. That's why it says at the bottom, demonstrated in the video. And I will hand out this PowerPoint deck afterwards. But this is one of the kites I made using this method that I'm going to talk about today, this dancer kite. Okay. Talk about the materials required to do this for anyone who's new to this. You know, you basically need a sewing machine, some spray tack glue, couple of kinds of scissors, a snap knife, Sharpie, Scotch tape, at least for this first part. And then the question is, how do you start with an image you found somewhere, a photograph, or something you found from another source, and turn it into a full-size template that you can actually work with? And you can see this image is on a piece of 8.5 by 11, and it's pretty faithful to the one behind me that we looked at on the wall.
Excuse me, are you presenting? My screen doesn't show your presentation, only your face.
Oh, why would that be? It says I'm presenting to everyone.
Mitch, you may have Kevin pinned. If you unpin him, then you'll see his presentation.
Thank you, Waddy. I was about to say that. So does everyone have Kevin Coleman's presentation showing on their screen? Is there anyone else that
Yes.
hasn't?
Got it. You're right on.
Right,
Okay.
you can see it now?
Yep.
Okay. Okay, so I talked about these. This is kind of the steps I go through. Here's an example of one of the kites that I made using this approach. Okay. I was just about talking about the tools you require. And I'm not going to go through all of these in detail. At the very end, when I talk to people who are maybe new to kite making, I'll talk a little bit more about selecting some of the tools and what I've learned so far. And I'm sure there are people on this call who know much more than I do. So I'm always willing to be corrected. And I talked about the fact that I started with this 8.5 by 11 image, which I found on Pinterest. Pinterest is my major source for the starting points for images. Usually I adapt them in some way, but it's a great place to look for ideas and for images that you can use for kite making. And then on my computer, I mocked it up. I used one of my paint tools just to color it in. So if you start with a black and white image, you color it all in. If you start with a color image, then you actually erase all of the color so that you end up with, at the end of the day, you want to have both a color guide and you want to have a black and white image to print large. And I do a little bit of editing. I've erased a couple of lines that I thought I didn't need. And also I figured out what the image was going to look like on the kite. So I generally build a 60-inch Rokkaku kite to hold my images. And in this case, I wanted the applique to be 42 inches tall. And I have to know that in advance. Okay, so I created a PDF file of the image. And that's just if you just print to PDF or convert to PDF. And then I opened it in Adobe Acrobat. Adobe Acrobat is a free program. I imagine that almost all of you would have this on a computer. Most computers come with it already installed. If not, you can get it from adobe.com and just download it for free. You don't need to buy any additions or add-ons or anything, just the free app. And you can open it in there and you can print it from there. And it's important to print an accurate picture on an 8.5 by 11 sheet with no scaling, just 100% for how the image is, so that you can see how big it is on the sheet. Okay. So here it says here, make sure you set it to actual size so that what you get will be measurable. And we're actually going to take measurements off of this print when it's printed. Okay. Then we figure out what the scaling factor is. So the scaling has got this was actually a 10-inch image. I want it to be 42 inches tall, so it's a 422% scaling factor, right? And make sure you measure only the image and not the paper when you do this. And then in Adobe Acrobat, in the free version, you can choose this poster print. There's a poster print here, which will print your image over multiple pages for you. Okay. When you do that, make sure you select no cut marks and no labels and an overlap of 0. In this case, it says 0.005, which is close enough to 0 for what we need. And then you can see there the rectangles that will be produced. Now, the rectangles are not 8.5 by 11 because there's a margin around each page. So they're actually more like 8 by 10.5 if you're trying to do a rough guide to check to see if your height is right. But it should come out pretty exact. Okay. Whoops, did I skip a page? And then we print it. And when we print it, we'll get a whole set of pages. And we'll lay the pages out on the floor to see if they look like what we expect them to look like. So this is what they look like when you lay them out on the floor. You can see there that there's white gaps everywhere because, as I said, there's a margin around each page when they're printed. I always then order to make the next step easier, I order the sheets in order by row so that I start with the lower right sheet on the bottom, and then I stack across the rows and end up with the top left sheet on the top so that it's easy to do. And then I tape it I tape it. And this is the taping pattern that we use. And I'm going to show you a short video which shows this whole process and how it looks. And I'll give you some additional comments as we do it. If you do it the way that shows in the video, it will actually give you a very strong, robust template. That one I showed you a little while ago has been rolled up and folded and flattened and used over and over again, and it's still quite strong and very durable, and yet it's also very easy to cut. So let me see if I can stop sharing this. I'm presenting. And I want to present, whoops, I'm sorry. Why stop sharing?
Kevin, down on the bottom, there should be a note or yeah, there you go. It says stop presenting.
There we go.
Found it?
Apologize for that, everyone. I've used lots of other tools. I'm still learning this one. I'm going to now share a short video, and it's me doing that entire process at a very high speed, but I think it will show you what I do. A tab. Okay, you should be seeing this now. And there's no sound on the video. I've taken the sound off so that I can talk through it, but you can see here that I'm actually trimming and cutting the pieces and laying them out. As I trim them, I normally trim only the top and the left-hand side. It's really important to be consistent, or else you'll end up with gaps or places where you're trying to butt two pieces together. You always want overlap. So trim just the top and the left-hand side. I'm doing a basic taping as I go along. Because there's no overlap, then the black lines butt up against each other perfectly, and you really only have to butt up. You only have to trim wherever their black lines cross. The rest you can just leave the whole page there. You don't have to trim all of the sides for every page. But you can see it's assembling now pretty quickly into the template. Now it's still kind of floppy and there's still lots of edges. So I do go around and trim off as much of the excess as possible. And then I do that taping I showed, which is to make sure I've taped in the middle, across all of the intersections and in the middle of each side and all around the edges. And what I'll end up with will actually be a very strong template. Okay. Then I take my Sharpie, and with my Sharpie, I go ahead and put in any missing lines or strengthen any lines. I'm actually demonstrating this here. I'd actually done it ahead of time and forgot to push the record button when I did it. But you want to make, because we're going to use these lines actually to cut along. We're eventually going to cut these lines out. So you don't want to have little skinny lines that you can't cut, and you don't want to have extra lines, or you don't want to have gaps in your lines. You want to make sure that the lines make sense to you as being the lines that will finally be your black lines in the finished product.
So Kevin, am I correct that you tape both on the front and the back? You
yeah, it's very important to tape. Sorry. It's very important to tape both the front and the back. Yeah. That's what gives it its stiffness.
Got it, thanks.
Okay. Yeah, if you can see here, this is taped front and back, and it actually makes it, it's quite strong. It's surprisingly strong when you do that. And the overlap of the paper helps with the strength as well. Okay. And obviously you can make that of any scale. Now you can use exactly the same process for making very small appliques as well, by the way. I don't know if you can see on the figure behind me, but center of his head, he has a little star, which is not attached to anything. I made that as a separate little applique, put it on afterwards. So let me go back to the presentation again. I hope I didn't go too fast over that. That's probably it's a fairly straightforward thing. I just wanted to make sure that you understood the Adobe, that capability existed in Adobe, and you can use it to scale up any kind of plans. You could use it to scale up plans for a kite. If you had a scale drawing of a kite, you could scale it to whatever size you want using that. So then when I've made one, the next thing I do is make another one. This is something I've learned, is that the first one gets completely destroyed in the next part of the process, which is cutting out, clearly. But since I tend to make my appliques in sections, then I want to have a guide to be able to reassemble them correctly. So this one you saw here is actually a reassembly guide. One of those two has already been destroyed, as you'll see in the next little video section when we get there. Okay. So now we're going through the next set of steps here on how do you cut out the template. What do you need for cutting it out? For cutting it out, I use a snap knife, basically the smallest size of snap knife that you get. You need the Easy Tack glue. You need lots of Scotch tape. I use a lot of Scotch tape in kite making. And there's different methods for keeping loose pieces of fabric together, but I particularly like this one.
Hey, Kevin.
Sharpie. Yes.
Are you showing your presentation? You're going to have to click present now.
Oh dear. I thought I did.
No worries.
I did do present now, but I think I didn't do is there a second step to that?
It'll be present now, and then you have to choose window, screen, or tab.
Yeah. Well, I seem to be in a place where I've got present now. Oh, maybe I do this. No. Oh, hell. Where am I? I'm lost here. I've got this window open. Here we go. Share. An error occurred when screen sharing. Present now. A window. How's that?
That's better.
Okay, so let me just go back to where I was. So I was saying that I make two. So there's the two of them, the twins. And one of them is the one I just held up. This is for a different, this is my current project. The last one was for the project behind me. This is for my current project. It's a bit more ambitious, and I try to step up the ambition level each time I do one of these. So I make two, as I said, one to guide the reassembly, as you'll see in a minute. So these are the steps we're going through now in blue. Again, this is from the video that's going on. The materials, the cutting is not done with a knife, scissors, it's really done with a knife. But I always keep a little set of embroidery scissors around because sometimes the fabric doesn't quite separate where you think it's going to. And I use lots of this Scotch tape. And there's my Sharpie that I use for putting the colors on. I put a color guide for myself on the template. And then I break the template down into parts. So this is why I need the second template for reassembly. I try and make it so each of the parts has a dominant color. I don't want to have multiple colors. I want multiple main colors on a piece. I like each piece to have a dominant color, and then I can add the second colors to it. For some reason, I have the head upside down. At some point, that head started to make sense to me that way up, but it's actually upside down in this picture. Then when I've cut it in pieces, of course, these are just raw edges, but I want something to remind me to cut out extra material because I want to have an overlap. So when the body sits down on the legs, I want there to be an overlap. So when I sew it, I can trim it, and I know I'll have it. I'm not trying to butt two pieces up together. So what I do is I take some more of that paper that I've got, more printer paper, and I just tape another strip on the back, tape it again front and back, and mark out with the Sharpie for myself a cutting allowance so that I know that I'll have some overlap. Okay. So it kind of becomes an applique kit. And actually breaking it down like this makes it much easier to sew the segments. Of course, I think anyone who's done this knows that it's easier to work with smaller fabric than it is to try and do intricate shapes on a very large piece of fabric. Right? And I lay them out on the boundary fabric, which in this case is black. It doesn't have to be black, but it often is. And I cut out the boundary fabric around each of the pieces. When you do that, it's really important to have a thought about the grain of the fabric. You want to keep the grain of the fabric running vertically and horizontally through your kite when it's finished. So you want to make sure that you've got as close as possible to that when you cut the pieces out on the black fabric, right? And we always make a little border again. I make the black fabric a little bit bigger for when we use the spray tack glue. So I always want to have a little border around whatever I'm gluing. Okay. It's important to keep the white border around. I'll show in a minute. In the video, you'll see why it's important to have that white border around, why you don't cut directly to the finished shape, but it's really just for stability. Okay. And the black border, the reason we keep the black, a little bit extra allowance on the black, is we're going to spray the spray glue on the paper, not on the fabric, because that spray tack glue is not symmetrical. When you spray it on something wet, then it adheres and it will be a part of that for life, unless you do something with solvents. But once it's dry and you touch something else to it, that second thing will stick, but it's not glued. It's just stuck because it's sticky. And when you peel the paper off, you want the paper to come off and not leave any glue residue at all on the fabric. If you were to spray the black fabric and put it on the paper, then when you peel the paper off, the black fabric would be the thing that would be all sticky afterwards. So you always spray the paper first, or spray the thing that's going to be cut away. Okay. Here, I've actually got something there. So, and second thing is make sure that you leave the glue dry on the paper before laying it on the fabric, right? So it says on the can to leave it for a minute, but I've learned it's better to leave it for 2 or 3 or even 5 minutes. You really want it to be dry, because if it's wet when it goes on the fabric, then some of the glue will adhere to the fabric and it'll be harder to separate later on. Now in this picture, I've shown myself holding it in front of my face and spraying it. In practice, you want to be a lot further back than that, but also in practice, I would never do this in my dining room. I wouldn't be allowed to, for one thing, but I do it out in the summertime. I do it outdoors. In the wintertime, I do it in my garage, where I put some pieces of paper on the wall and I go there. Being in Canada here, the wintertime is too cold to do it outdoors. Right? And then we'll be just about ready for sewing. Now I'm going to show a little video now of me doing this cutting process and what that looks like. Okay. So I'm presenting stop sharing. And present now to a tab. So here I am. I've been to the garage. I've sprayed the paper, and I've. So is there a comment?
I'm not seeing.
Oh, not seeing it.
I'm not seeing your presentation.
Okay, let me stop. What the heck? Gonna go back here. Oh, I see what I did. Is that better?
Yeah.
There you go. Now it's showing.
Okay, and now I'll make it full screen. By the time I finish this, I'll understand how to do it properly. I haven't been to the garage yet, so there it is. I put a couple of pieces of tape on. Now I'm demonstrating the spraying. As I say, it's much too close. You'd never actually do that, or it would make a gooey mess. But for demonstration purposes, and then I'm going to put it on there. Okay. Now I think I've come back from the garage. I've already done the gluing, and I'm going to start the cutting out. Okay. And by the way, I've speed this video up a lot in many places, so it doesn't take quite as long as it did in real life. And after watching this, I was amazed at how slowly I do things and how often I stop and just look at something. So I've taken those all out as well. So what I'm doing here is just marking on here the parts that are green and the parts that are yellow. It seems silly, but when you get busy in cutting, and you get, especially if you get more complex shapes, it's easy to lose track of what color you're on and start cutting out things you didn't intend to. And then I've got my snap knife. And then I realized that every time I start a new project, I like to start a new point. So I'm sure you're all familiar with these, but you just break off and you get a brand new point to cut with. And it's important to always have around somewhere a sharps jar. And I have this little jar. I keep all my old sewing machine needles, my rotary cutter blades, all those sort of things that you'd not want to dispose of improperly, right? And then I start cutting, and you'll see this will go very slow for a few seconds. It's really important also to make sure you've got the right surface to cut against. You need a proper cutting mat, which this is. This is my smaller one since I'm making videos. I want to try and make this appear accessible to everyone. I also have a much larger one that I bought recently that will cover most of the table, which is a little bit. And that's about how fast I cut. And I'm actually cutting right to the black lines on the template. Okay. Now we'll just go ahead and cut much faster in a second. It's important to take your time with cutting. There's also a question comes up. Sometimes in characters, you'll have some straight edges. So these Lego characters, their legs are straight edges, and it's tempting at first to think, oh, I'll use a straight edge for that. But if you do, it'll look funny afterwards. I kind of like my kites to look as if they were hand drawn, as if someone drew them. And so the hand cutting, even of the straight lines, helps give that little bit of unevenness that makes it seem like it was a human product. And there we've gotten to the end of the cutting. We've still got that paper boundary all around it. This is where I stop and look at it for a little while. Apologize for that, but and now you can see now even though it's kind of very thin lines and it's a bit spider webby, that paper boundary gives it enough strength that it's still got its shape. You notice that I haven't cut out the secondary color. The yellow color is not cut out. It's just a solid black still. So, okay. So the next step will be to match it up with a piece of green paint, which I've already done. I had a video showing me getting the green, cutting it out, but I forgot to hit record. So in fact, I didn't have a video. Laying it down, it seems like with all these little bits and pieces, it wouldn't lay down properly, but actually it's very stable. The ripstop nylon is dimensionally very stable. So quite often, if something doesn't seem to be lying flat, just lifting it up and letting it fall back naturally, it will actually fall back very, very well. So now my green and my black are both stuck together. I've sprayed the back of the black. But there's no glue on the exposed parts of the green. Again, if I had sprayed the green and stuck it on, then the green would be all sticky. But right now, there's nothing sticky being exposed. And even when I peel the paper off, the black lines won't be sticky. And now what I'm going to do is just cut away, finally, all of the edge, because now I have that's a visit from my wife, have a now I have, the green fabric will give me all the stability I need. I don't need all that paper around the edge of it anymore, right? So you see that's still already, it's quite durable. There you can see it. It's actually lying flatter than it might look, but I've got this intense white light coming from the side, from the sunlight outdoors. And so that's highlighting any slight undulations in the fabric. And now I'm cutting out the part which will be yellow, and the eyes will eventually be white. So I've cut out the secondary color now. Now here I don't use the spray. I don't use spray glue for this next step. You'll see I'll use Scotch tape. Normally I only use the spray glue for the first part. Oh, an important step here is I look afterwards and think, where have I got the green fabric or the color fabric covering parts of the black where it doesn't need to be? See, that black, exposed black, is still sticky, and it's still useful for adhering the next color to the kite. And also, when I come to sew it, I don't want to have extra layers of fabric because they tend to peek out. So then all of a sudden I've got what should be just the yellow and black, and I've got little green bits might come and peek out somewhere. These are just my, those are my fabric weights that double up as my weights for when I'm launching my my soft kites in the air. I put those on as weights, and so they're painted yellow so I can find them in the field. But in the wintertime, I use them as fabric weights. And now you can see I've got my paper all lined up. I was careful to make sure that it was cut so that the grain is all square. And now I'm just going to tape it in place. Okay. I don't put any little folds in the tape. If I put tape on the face of the kite, I'll fold over the end of it to make an easy pull tab. But on the back, I'm really aware that this is going to be on the bottom in the sewing machine, and I don't want anything uncontrolled underneath the fabric when I'm sewing. Here I'm just showing that yellow is overlapping some of the black lines. You can see there, I don't want to sew through the yellow when I'm sewing those lines in the green and black. So I'm just going to cut the yellow away from wherever it overlaps. And it overlaps in, I think, 3 places here. I'm only going to show you the head of this character. I'm not showing you the other pieces of it. But you can see here, even though the character is 42 inches tall, this is quite a nice size piece of it to be working with. Very, very manageable in the sewing machine. Okay. And now I really just tape it all down, and I make sure I don't tape where the black lines are, so that I can sew this in, and then I'll trim it. When I trim it, I just use the standard trimming with shears, with fabric shears. There, it wasn't lying quite flat. You know, the goal always is to be flat. Just try and have everything as flat as it can possibly be. I think we've all experienced it where you start sewing something and then all of a sudden you realize it started to pillow or it's gone weird on you. And this time I wanted to make the eyes, pupils, the little highlights on the pupils white. I tried it on my last kite. The one behind me has just white insignia tape on it, but I thought, you know, I'm not entirely satisfied with that because it's still a little bit dark. And there I am now, and I'm taking all the paper off, and I take it off and I lift off a certain amount, and then I cut it away, and then I lift off some more, and then I cut it away. So I'm off. And you can see here that piece didn't lie quite right, but you just lift it up, and when it flops back down, it flops down exactly where you want it to be. A little scrap of paper there got left, making sure the eyes are right. And then I've got something which is pretty much ready to be sewn. I'm holding it upside down again. I don't know what went wrong with me. My mind somehow had that face that way up, and then all of a sudden I realized that, turn it over, and then we're pretty much done. But come on, Kevin. Yeah, that's the way up it should be. That's what the face looks like. Eyebrows on top of the eyes. Okay, I'm going to stop it there. And I'm going to go back to the presentation and stop sharing. Stop presenting. Any questions about that process before I go on?
You had some comments in the chat that I think are pretty helpful. Excuse me for a second. Frank said, if you run a sweater or a hoodie over the fabric, it becomes electrostatically charged, and then you can adhere it to the mat.
Okay, that's a good.
This could be very, very helpful. So I do that always to have the Icarex as flat as possible and to lay it down and have at the end. Doesn't matter how the curves are, how the things are lying over and under and whatever. It's at the end flat on the map, and this should be the status before you start with the next step you would like to explain. Sewing.
Sewing. Okay, great. Thank you. Yeah, if it's not flat before you start sewing, it certainly won't be flat afterwards. That's a good suggestion. Now, I've suffered from that. In fact, I got 3/4 of the way through a kite when I had to abandon it and start all over again early in my career because the unevennesses were just adding up, and they just gets worse and worse and worse and propagates. So where are we in the presentation now? Okay, so let me just go back to the presentation. I'll finish that, and then I'll take any more questions. Now, are you seeing that? Did I get it right that time?
Right.
Yep, looks good.
Okay. So there's the picture that we ended up with, ready to sew. Here's all the sections laid out. So I've got all 5 sections there. You can see some gaps because they're not laid out perfectly. I haven't got them on the template. And you can see I haven't taken the paper off the other sections yet. I take the paper off when I'm ready to sew it because otherwise mischief happens. Okay. And so I know I'm not going to do a full thing on sewing, but I thought that if there's some people on who are beginners, I would give them my beginner's knowledge. So, and I'm happy to have anyone else offer more suggestions. Talk about the equipment you use a little bit. You need a sewing machine. You always have to have 2 kinds of scissors. And I guess everyone says this, you want to keep your fabric scissors for your fabric only, never use it for anything else. But then you got to have a pair of general utility scissors around for cutting paper and helping for all the miscellaneous things that you do. If you don't have the second pair around, you'll never go searching for them. You'll be tempted to grab your fabric shears, and after a while, they won't be fabric scissors anymore. And I use the snap-off knife still. That's a useful tool. In fact, these are all the tools that I use during my sewing process. I thought I'd just put them all out. This is another pair of general purpose ones that I keep around. These are always on my sewing table somewhere for anything odd that I need to do. I've got the long 8-inch sewing shears. I've also got a pair of these 5-inch Ginger shears, knife edge shears. They're quite expensive, but they're really sharp and they do a great job of cutting out smaller shapes. So I use this for the outline for the large shapes. I use this one when I'm doing more detailed work. And I always keep a pair of embroidery scissors around for when you've really got to go and try and get that last little bit out of a corner. There's a line where somehow you've got a little bit of raggedness and you want to trim it. I find these are easier to work with. This I really only use for cutting out large shapes. They're really inaccurate. They're great for doing long straight lines. When I make my kite sails, I use them, but I wouldn't use them around the applique very much. And then I have my snap knife and my X-Acto knife and my seam rippers because you always end up having to unpick something. I always have a small one and a larger one. Actually, I've got a little set of them. And my thread snips. And the cutting board itself here shown is actually part of the set. The cutting board and the knife and the roller knife actually form a system. You can't use the knife or the roller knife unless you've got the cutting board of some sort. This is my smaller one. I also have a larger one. Okay. I wanted to make the point for anyone who hasn't got a sewing machine or they're worried their sewing machine isn't good enough. You don't need to have a professional sewing machine. I'm sure there's advantages to having them. This is the one that I use. I got it from Costco, but this is a current Walmart ad, $249, and it does everything I need. Are there some things where I think, oh, maybe I'll upgrade one day? Yes. But is this enough to get started and make all sorts of kites and appliques and all sorts of things? Yes, that's really all you need, a basic kite. If you thread, 100% polyester thread. Again, I'm talking for beginners. So all you people who have been doing kites for years and years and years, you can make alternate suggestions. I'm happy to hear them, but I'm not trying to teach you this. I'm sure you know it. These are the two of the major makes, Gutermann and Dual Duty. And the thing to do is don't go to the dollar store and buy the dollar store threads, because they may be fine in short lengths, but over the length of a long seam, they could be points of weakness and they may break. It's not so much about the strength of the thread with cheap threads, it's more about the uniformity of the thread. And then the needles, if you're buying needles, particularly this is important if you're borrowing your spouse's sewing machine or someone else's sewing machine, you want to make sure the needles you have are the right needles for this. I use a 70-10 Microtex because that seems to be what's recommended for the 50 weight threads that these are. 70-10 or an 80-12, something in that range. You may not know that you can actually tell what the needle is by looking at the two little color stripes on it. And so you want to have the Microtex is this purple color, and the 70 is a dark green, or the 80 is an orange. So you want to look for those two colors on your needles. If you've got a machine, someone's giving you a machine, you don't know what kind of a needle it is, you can tell that, you can at least tell the size of it. I don't know how you tell the shape of it, but you tell the size of it by looking at the two color bands. And as quickly, if you've got a collection of needles and you're not sure which one it is, although I always keep my needles in here. Start a new needle for every project and throw the old one away in the little sharps jar that I showed you. Okay, sewing order. I thought I'd do something on sewing order. What I've learned is not to start by sewing around the outside. It looks obvious to sew all around the outside, but then you can easily start to get pillowing where it goes odd on you. And then it's hard to, then you end up ripping it out and redoing it. So the order I did this one in is I did this line first, then I did around the eyes. So I'm kind of locking the two fabrics together in the center. Then I went down to the next major line and then up to the next major line. Then I started the fill line there and the two fabric folds, which are really just decorative lines. Doesn't really matter so much where they are. And then and then the eyes. With the eyes, I don't try and go a tight little circle around the pupil there. What I tend to try and do it in a couple of lines where the curves are not so difficult, because you don't want to be having your whole piece and be trying to continually turn it in very tight circles if you can avoid it. So I try not to be bound by the shapes. I tend to look more at what's a pattern of sewing. So sometimes my sewing will flow from one shape to another in a template if it makes more sense from a sewability and kind of structural point of view. I don't worry about being bound by what the lines are about.
Kevin, is your zigzag pretty much the size of the black line? You go from edge to edge with your zigzag?
I try to, I'm going to actually talk about that in just a second, but yeah, I try to get close to that. Not 100%, because I want to allow myself some room for human error. Yeah, I use wider and thinner lines, and I've got a picture of that in a second. Thank you. Oops, that's not what I want to do. What I want to do now is to go forward. I missed my chance to go forward. It's going to do that again for some reason. Oh, come on. We'll just force it forward. Okay. The other thing I've found useful for me, and this is also something about using a less expensive machine, is I make one of these for myself periodically whenever I lose the last one. I've made about 3 of them over time, I guess. But I just set up my, first of all, the stitches you use a straight stitch. I haven't got that on here. A zigzag stitch, which is really the one used for all the applique work. And then just for demonstration, in my hems on my sails, I use this 3 up, 3 down. The seamstresses would call it a stretch stitch, but that's not what it's used, but it's the standard hemming sort of a stitch. I like to leave the length of the stitch constant when I'm sewing and just vary the width of it. So I don't try and vary both. I leave the length at 2 on my machine. I guess it's 2 millimeters, I think. But I vary the width and I make myself a little guide. This is just 2 sheets of 8.5 by 11 paper because then I can keep it somewhere and with all my other sewing notes. And I start off with a 0.5 width, and this is what my machine has as settings: 0.5, 1, 1.5, up to 5 is the maximum. And I just sew a little section with each of those in a continuous sew, so that if I'm actually looking at my kite getting ready to sew it, I can actually use this as a guide and say, okay, where do I want to start? It just reminds me of where I want to start with my settings. It's a good idea. While I'm sewing, I always keep a scratch pad and I note what settings I'm using so that I don't get wildly different sewing styles. Sewing machine will sew paper just fine.
Can you taper your width while you're sewing?
Yes. I take my foot off of the pedal, so to speak, and then just make an adjustment and then carry on. Let me talk about this, and then I'll come back to that because I've got a slide for that. Beginning and ending the stitching lines, I always start a little in and then sew backwards to my starting point of my line, and then sew the line, and then reverse again to finish. I don't go back and forth 2 or 3 times because you start to get a lot of holes in the fabric, but you do want to have a little bit of a backward stitch at each end. And all that really does is it says that if the thread starts to unravel, it can unravel 1 or 2 stitches without starting to destabilize the kite, without starting to pull away. I know that some people will pull the threads through and knot them, which I think makes sense if you're designing a sport kite. But for these ones, they're just too many short runs. You'd have to have incredible patience to do that. So I use the fallback, which is that when I finish sewing a piece like this, I'll turn it over and I'll put a little drop of fray check at the beginning and end of each sewing run.
I will add of a handful of sport kites and stuff that I've helped make and also watched a few others make. Almost everyone just uses the reverse stitch or a tack, a bar tack, instead of pulling through, because indeed that takes so long to do the pull through and knot and then to clean things up.
Yeah, I tried it for a while, then I yeah. Okay. And this is the question about the different stitch lines. So I do try and match the width to the line, but as you see, I don't try and get to the full. I've filmed this from the back. Obviously, I sew from the front, but if I tried to take a picture of black thread on black nylon, you wouldn't see it. So I've taken the picture from the back where you can see the stitches. So that would be this is my kind of standard stitch around. When I get to a narrower line, I make it narrower, but I don't try and go the full width of the line. I don't know if there's reason to worry about that. But definitely on the right-hand side, you can see where I started at this width, which was probably a 3, and then I've gone down and down and down. And by the time I got to the end here, it was very thin. Yeah. So yes, I do vary it while I sew. I don't worry about. I wouldn't start and stop. Now my machine is being a computerized machine. It's really easy to do that. I don't know whether all sewing machines are that easy to adjust as you go. I don't know. But with mine, I'm just pushing a button and then suddenly it's sewing at a different width. Right?
So it looks like you're just sewing down the middle of the black line. At what point do you sew on each side of the black line? Like how?
I'm asking myself that question right now, actually, because the next section I'm doing has some very wide pieces of black line, and I tried sewing at the maximum width, and then I really thought today, I don't like that. I'm going to start sewing the two up and down each side. So I'll start doing that.
Okay.
But I don't know what the rule of thumb is. I'm still learning. So if you have suggestions, do you know what the impact of that is? Do you have any guidelines that you use, anyone?
Well, actually, I was just talking with Ron Gibeon, and I'm supposed to pass on to you, Kevin. Big congratulations, because he's also been watching your progress. His rule of thumb is kind of how it feels. He likes his stitch width, kind of the same width throughout all of his kites. So he doesn't move his stitch width. So if the line work is bigger than the stitch width, then he starts looking at maybe stitching both sides, if that makes sense. Honestly, it's kind of a personal preference. He does a lot of heavy applique, so there may be, some difference there. I know there's a handful of other master kite builders on here that may also have their own opinions, but I did want to pass on. Ron says hi. He's sorry he's not here, and he's really happy to see you sharing.
Okay, thanks, Nick.
Kevin, I certainly wouldn't call myself a master or even very good at this, but the way I like to do it is I try to have my zigzag. My zigzag varies from virtually a straight line to, I think, 6.5 millimeters wide. And I try to have the zigzag, the holes for the zigzag, maybe 1/8 of an inch off the edge of the fabric. And like you, I just have to push a button to narrow it down gradually as I go. I know there are people that use 2 straight stitches down each side. I always think of that as an opportunity for it to tear because you're putting perforations in, although I've never actually seen anything tear.
Yeah.
So if it's much wider than 6 or 7 millimeters, then I do, as you suggest, I make 2 lines. But if I can stretch it with a zigzag, I just have the edges of the zigzag within maybe 1/8 of an inch of the edge of the applique. So that's the way I do it. I guess everybody's.
So since the black fabric, the black ripstop has been cut with a razor blade, basically, rather than like hot cut, by stitching down the middle, do the black outlines ever fray? Because I've always done it the way Mitch does it, where you kind of go off the edge a little bit. And my understanding was that prevented the fraying. What's been your experience?
So I think it depends on what use. I've thought about this a little bit. I think it depends a lot on what level of use you think your kites will get. So my kites, this kite may fly 2 or 3 times in a summer on a nice afternoon for an hour at a time. So it's I put up a couple of kites and talk to the neighbors as they come by, and I rotate them around. So my kites don't get very much heavy use. If I was making a banner or something that was going to be out for multiple days, or if I was a person who exhibited at shows, traveled around, I'd probably be a lot more worried about that.
I think Barbara Meyer, my kites get a whole lot of use, and good ripstop will not fray.
Yeah.
You can cut right up to the line.
Okay.
It's
what I use is.
I agree with that.
Place else, yeah. I don't stitch over the edge. I just stitch right up to the edge because it's not a satin stitch. We're not doing cotton.
Yeah.
I agree, up to, but not. sometimes I go over for other reasons, but for something like this, a line, I go up to but not over. And like you say, these fabrics are coated. I mean, they're urethane coated on the back. They're not going to fray.
Yeah.
Sometimes even the ends of my tails, they don't fray, even though they're whipping in the wind.
Yeah. Now the nylons I use most of this is all Chikara. Everything you're seeing here is all Chikara ripstop, and I've started using Texlon a little bit for the sails. But I've never had a fraying problem.
I think with
I second that emotion. I cold cut all my stuff, and I'm replacing a sail now on one of my Rikaku, and the fabric is so aged that you can poke your finger through it anywhere on the main part of the sail. Fraying is the least of its problems.
The one place I use a straight stitch, I didn't mention this and I should have, is when I make the applique, all around the border, I do a long straight stitch, the longest straight stitch I can pretty much, as like a basting stitch. And then it gets overlaid with a zigzag when I sew it into the sail. But just to keep the integrity of it until I'm ready to place it on a sail, then I do a long basting stitch around the edge so that I'm not doing stitching over stitching, so to speak. Okay.
Part of the issue, your method cuts before you sew, and a lot of the other people sew before they cut, so you're going to get a different effect.
Yes. Yeah, my first two kites were made with the other method where you sew and then you cut back, right?
Mm-hmm.
But then Ron mentioned that in South America, he'd seen these people doing it the other way around, where they actually cut the black. They cut the outline and then they laid it on the fabric and then cut through the fabric. And I thought, oh, I'll try that. And I think it gives it a cleaner line. I like it better. But I think it's personal preference which way you do it. But yeah, it's absolutely a difference. You do get a difference if you sew the black first and then you trim it back to the sewn line. Right.
Yeah, you need to be an expert to do it right, like Spencer Chung or Jose Sainz.
Yeah. Yeah.
I would step in a thought real quick on the sort of sewing up to the edge of the fabric point and the lack of fraying. I would say that from a sport kite perspective, I have had kites fray. Like sport kites are being flown very aggressively, especially how I fly them sometimes. So like there's a lot of aggression happening there on the edges, and I have had fraying in places. So for me, I hot cut a lot more. And with a sport kite in general, I want things to be very like tight, very flat, very tight, very like taut, all of that. So anything where there's like an edge that's a little bit flappy at all, I don't like that. So I really want to make sure that all of my seams go right up to the edge as much as possible to make sure everything is really nice and tight and flat and like nothing going awry, because sport kites are so like particular in that way. But yeah.
Yeah.
Jerry Pinnell had a technique that was interesting. She did a zigzag down the black line, and then she would put two parallel straight stitches on each side. And the straight stitches would be literally on the edge of the black, where the zigzag was covering most of the black.
And Waddy, I agree. Fighters are the same. You don't want anything flopping on a fighter that'll slow it down or make it veer to one side. So the fraying, even notwithstanding, if you're going to be flying fast and hard, you don't want floppy edges. Yeah. I think for this kind of thing where the applique is not going to be back cut, but it's just laying over the top to be black, I think it would have minimal difference. But I agree about sport kite.
Yep, for something stable like a Rokaku that's just kind of going to sit and look pretty, then yeah, it's probably not really much of a concern.
Yeah. Yeah, my audience are the 10-year-olds coming by who can recognize the characters, right? So, okay.
Hey, real quick, you had someone raise their hand. I believe it was Chris Hansen. Let me see if I can find it again. Chris, did you raise your hand?
I'm here. Yeah, I was going to say if you cut first and then sew second, you can hot cut the edges of everything. Then you don't have to worry so much about the edging.
Yeah, that's another. Yes, I agree with. I've tried hot cutting. So in that one of the dancer that I had up on earlier, the clouds were all hot cut, but I haven't seen a difference. No, maybe I'm not a good hot cutter. I've only done it that one time. But with that one, I was able to draw the clouds directly on the white fabric and then just hot cut them out and sew them on. I didn't use any border or anything because I didn't want them to be too prominent. Maybe I should stop and start sharing again.
Yeah, for those people who fly their kites aggressively, that might be a solution.
Yeah, I'll just stop there. I don't think I need that last slide. So stop sharing. You are presenting. Stop presenting. Yeah, so on this kite, I hot cut the clouds. Right. And then just sewed them on, and there's no, I can't see myself. So I don't know what you're seeing.
We can see you.
There we are.
Yep.
Yeah, so on this one, these clouds were all hot cut. And this dancer was made in sections. This dancer was made in two pieces. I cut her right across her waistband on her skirt there. So I got pictures of just the top of her, and then I made the bottom of her, and then I sewed her together, and then I put her on the sail as a complete finished piece. And these clouds extended behind her, and then I just cut them away. I just cut them off when I did the final, after doing the final sewing. And I do use that sewing and cutting. So when I did the eyes, I didn't show it on the video. When I sewed the eyes on the character, like the one above me there, I put that big piece of yellow on, then I had to go and do the shears with the cutting after and behind. But the places where I'm cutting afterwards are not on the black lines that are visible. It's all in what's behind. And there you just have to make sure you cut away enough that it's not showing through the black lines or showing around the black lines.
Kevin?
Yes?
This probably doesn't hit most of the people, but if you are left-handed, it makes a huge difference having a left-handed scissor, especially in application. The blades actually make a difference, and if you are lefty using a right-handed applique scissor as you're going along doing applique trimming, you will snip through threads.
Yep. Yeah, and I think the scissors are expensive, but if you're going to spend that much money, I think you're absolutely right. You should buy a left-handed. If you're left-handed, spend the money and buy left-handed scissors. That's something Ron Gibeon taught in his first video, is the importance of having good scissors, and I believed him, and I've bought good scissors since then, and I haven't regretted it for a minute because they really cut well. And if ever I've tried to use a pair of our household scissors, the results are not anywhere near the same, right? So thank you for that. That's a really good comment.
Kevin,
I don't know if there's left-handed sewing machines or not, but
one of these, I wish there were actually, because the needle is always on the wrong side. But my knee lift is going in the wrong direction. But I really, really admire that dancer, and I noticed that the skirt is broken into blocks, and some of it is. Do you use software to break the image into blocks, or is that the way you found it on the computer?
that was a stained glass. So I find my images in Pinterest in two places. Some are stained glass images, and some of them are coloring book images. And so that was actually a stained glass picture. So I had a picture of stained glass. So they had already done it broken up for me. I don't know whether I can show you that or not, but yeah. So it was, so I used whoever did the original stained glass work, they had thought that through and they broke it up. In fact, I took out a lot of their lines because they weren't useful.
Hey, Amy, I see your hand is raised.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. Good to see everybody, first of all. Second, I just wanted to, I took a class from Jose Sanz. I was scared to death, sat in the back row. But he did a very amazing thing with my Ginger scissors. He actually takes a file and just takes the very edge of the tip off on the bottom part of your scissors, so that when you're doing cutaway applique, which I know this is a little different, but just for people who are trying cutaway, so that it doesn't dig down through the other layers of fabric that you don't want. And I wouldn't even begin to try to demonstrate it or teach anybody how to do it, but I'm sure there's someone here that knows the method, which might be helpful to a lot of people at some point.
Yeah. Yeah, the scissors I used, and this is something that Ron, I think it was Ron Bohart told us about. He talked about these Ginger scissors where the bottom edge is rounded like that, right?
Yeah.
There's a knife edge, a Ginger knife edge, but the bottom is rounded. Oops, hold on. Yeah, there we go.
Right.
And you can see, so when I keep that on the bottom as I'm doing the cutting, so that it's not going to dig into anything, right? And I also learned the hard way that the upper one has to be next to the threads. If you try and cut them with this, with the threads on the other side of the scissors, it doesn't work. It works one way. I'll just show you the stained glass one that. There's that question about how did I get that? Here's what I saw on Pinterest. Am I sharing that? Yes. So you can see that's the starting image on Pinterest, and I took out a lot of these extra lines, but basically that's where I got the blocking of the skirt from. That's from there. On Pinterest, I look for two things. I look for stained glass and coloring book. And stained glass. So coloring book has nice strong lines. So these characters are strong lines. The first one I ever did, I don't know if you, was a duck, and that was a stained glass again. And I turned that into a duck kite. Okay. I'm meeting. Stop.
Hey, Dave Butler, I see you have your hand raised.
Yeah, I was going to say the printing process. If you have a good PDF, you can take it down to Office Depot and have them print it out. I just brought one in to them this last week, and they're going to print it out at 4 feet by 6 feet.
Yep.
So there is no taping.
Yeah, absolutely. That's an option. This is the.
It was just cheap.
Yeah.
I have had a bit of trouble with that in that I make my templates because it's for sport kites, I make them under a specific dimensions already. And so when I tried to go and have like FedEx or someone print them, they scale it to a specific like set of paper. And it's like, no, it's not like these dimensions I want. So I've like had trouble with that part. Maybe if I go there in person instead of ordering online, maybe they'll do it the way that I want. But yeah, caution. Yeah.
The problem is with the wide format printer, you have to make sure that they've got the wide format printer that will actually handle it. And in my case, I called down ahead of time, do you have something that's 48 inches wide? And they said, yes, but it's in print shop. And we can print easily 6 feet. So when I gave them the PDF that was actually scaled for 4 6 by 6 feet, they could handle it. If they've got something that is 44 inches, then they're going to scale it on you, and that's a bad thing.
The thing I would say, Dave, is that if you're sending them a PDF file, you want to make the best thing to do is to send them a vector file. You have your image be a vector image, because sometimes what happens is when they blow up the image, the lines on the outside of the diagram become enlarged as well. The tracing lines become enlarged along with the rest of the image. Now that doesn't happen with a vector image, and so PDF has a way of making the image into a vector image, but it's worth doing that conversion in order to avoid the outlines becoming oversized.
Yeah.
You should be able to convert your vector file into a PDF and have it remain as a vector file in PDF. What I did was that I drew a ruler, 15 centimeter and a 6-inch ruler, because I was printing on small paper, to be printed full size, so that when it comes from the printer, you put a real ruler against it and find out if it is the size that you think it is.
Mm-hmm. That's a great idea. I noticed that a lot of sewing patterns, because I do a little bit of sewing as well, and sewing patterns that are on PDF will always have a 1-inch square. They actually just put a 1-inch square right on the pattern, and when you print it off at 100%, it should be exactly 1 inch on your paper, right? So same idea. So that's a great suggestion.
I just printed one of Andrew's patterns, 36-inch wide by about 10 foot long, and threw a ruler on it at the end with the scale that he provided. It works like a charm. As long as you talk to the person running the printer I use Staples, but you talk to them and say, this is what we're doing. And from a PDF, they do it well.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I think that's all I had to share. I will show you just my very first applique I ever made, and I'd encourage you, if you haven't done this before and you're thinking about trying it, this was the very first one that I ever made. You saw me cutting holes out of the white part. I took a piece of my failed unicorn kite. This was the first try at a unicorn. There's the white. And I just, on a piece of paper, I drew the 2 concentric circles. I sprayed them. I put them on a piece of dark blue. I cut around the inside, glued it to a piece of green, cut around the outside, and then sewed it onto this scrap of white fabric. So that's a really easy project. Took me less than an hour to do it. And at the end of that, it was comfortable that I understood what the process was, and it worked perfectly. So highly encourage you to do something like that as a start.
Just Kevin, to clarify your process, you have the black piece on paper that you cut away, and you have to put the paper onto the green, and then you have to sort of lift up the black to peel away the paper from between the two.
No, the paper is always on top. So I spray the paper, and then I lay it on the black, and then I cut out all of the internal shapes for the green. And then I didn't show it, but I go away and I spray the back of the black. So now the black has the glue on it, which I don't care if the black has glue, because it's always, for the rest of its life, it's going to be married to the green. And then I lay that on the green. And then at the very end, I peeled the paper off the face. The paper was still in the face of it.
Gotcha. Thank you. That's much clearer.
Yep, I could show you that again, I guess. Yeah.
Susie has her hand up and wants to ask a question.
Will you have the PowerPoint somewhere where we can review it again, and maybe the videos that you showed?
Yeah, the videos, I've got the first one finished. I'll send all of that to Nick. The PowerPoint I'll send right away. The first video I'll send her a link because it's online. And I can send her the raw video that you saw for the second part as well. So I'll make sure that Nick has all that.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Yep, and I just sent an email out to everyone that had registered. I know there's a handful of folks in here that didn't use the registration process, but just in case, so you know, there is a lot of the supplemental information will be posted on the fortunafound.com website, and I'll also send it out via email so you can come back and reference this. In the coming week, I will be posting the recordings from all of these sessions. So if there's something you missed or you feel a little bit behind, you can catch up and rewatch the presentations.
Okay. Did someone else raise a hand just then? Rhonda, I think.
One second. Yep. Actually, I know Jason did, and then he lowered his hand, and then Rhonda hopped in there. So let's go with Jason real quick.
Oh yeah, thanks for this. This is really helpful. I have a couple applique sections I've been thinking about how to do, and I'm going to use your technique and give that a shot. So I'll see how that goes. Yeah, this is really helpful to see the step-by-steps of how you do it. Thanks.
Thank you.
Awesome. And Rhonda?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I'm going to go back old school just real quick and bring a little history in. And I'm not sure how many of you out there knew Deb Cooley. She did her own technique, which was basically what you did with the paper, but she used sheet metal. And she would hand snip her designs, the outline portion, what would technically be your black, out of sheet metal using shears. And she would hot cut everything. And it always confused me watching her do it. She just was so prolific at what she did. And she developed her own technique because she was often, I think, Eastern Oregon and was by herself and just came up with this technique. But basically it was cutting out of the sheet metal all of your black. Then she would lay the sheet metal piece on black ripstop, hot cut around all of the areas. Then she would take that black ripstop off, and then whatever color that she wanted, say the green of a leaf, she'd lay that pattern over green and hot cut around the outer edge of the black and hot cut it, then pull that off and lay it onto the black. Anyway, it was a process, but when she got done and stitched, I think she just used a straight stitch, stitched it all together, and then stitched it onto her background color. And I have pieces of hers that the fabric has just fallen apart, but I can go back in and I can redo her design the old fashioned, not doing the sheet metal. But when Deb passed away a couple of years ago, most of her sheet metal patterns, I think, got dumped into the trash, and it was just heartbreaking to see all that go away. But again, it was her technique. So anyway, I'm going to get off now.
That makes sense. That'd be a great technique, particularly if you wanted to be able to replicate them and put out a series of them. But it sounds like it's fundamentally the same technique.
Yeah, she did it for a living, so it was quickly repeatable and consistent, and she could change colors anytime she wanted. But she just was so personable, and for anybody who got a chance to meet her and sew with her laugh and M&Ms. Okay, go through the memory things. All right, I'm done.
Thanks, Rhonda. Barbara Meyer, I saw you just had your hand up.
Barbara, you're muted.
Sorry. I was going to make the same comment Kevin did. Deb sold her kites for a living. So she made her pattern once and made it infinite number of times on infinite number of platforms, whether it be an Eddy or a Delta, she could do the same design. So if you are looking to repeat, it's worth putting some money, maybe not sheet metal. I don't use sheet metal, but it's worth it to put it in wood or cardboard or something that you can do it over again.
Yeah.
That's all.
Yeah, Robert Brassington does it in foam core board when he takes it out to all his classes.
Yeah.
Dave, this is Amy. Does he do hot cutting then, or does he do a knife?
He uses the pattern to cut the pieces of fabric to proper shape with extra around it. And then when you sew it, then you do an applique scissor.
Ah, okay.
Yeah.
I worked in the picture framing business for many, many years, and foam core we used all the time, but I know with anything hot knife, it would be melting. That's why I was asking.
Could you use foil tape on the edge of foam core to make it hot knife proof?
I use a poster board and I put the copper tape on the side of that, and it hot cuts really good unless you're going to make like 100 patterns of it.
Yeah, I use poster board, and then I go get the aluminum duct tape. I've educated several salespeople, and then I cut it down to a 1-inch width and edge mine, and I've got patterns that I've made dozens of kites off of.
That's a great idea. I've never thought of that. Thank you.
But be careful because the edges of that aluminum tape are really sharp.
That sounds like practical experience, does it?
You say, really? Because I've never had that problem. It's soft. It's not like edges of ductwork. It's like a duct, you know, it looks like duct tape, but it's metal. It's not sharp.
I know that Lindsay has actually cut out shapes for like Ron Gibeon for doing multiple kites, like the bee kite.
Yeah, he has the advantage of a large scale CNC router that he cuts out a lot of pieces for his normal business of building cabinetry and stuff. He's made me a few templates as well out of essentially plastics. I think it's a ABS type plastic, and oh, I'm forgetting the name of it, but it's a type of like linoleum, so it's a little bit more flexible. We've used those as templates to cut against for hot cutting, and they hold up quite a while, and they also hold up to the heat.
Yeah, I think that's for Micah.
Could you 3D print a template? I don't see why not. I imagine though that 3D printing a template, you're gonna only want to 3D print small pieces, because a 3D printed template for some of the larger pieces is gonna take a rather long time.
You'll be limited on size, and it's also a thermoplastic, right? So it melts. That's why you can print with it in the first place. So I've thought about that, but yeah, it wouldn't help with hot cutting, for example, so much. But yeah.
You would probably be better using something like a CNC table that can cut plywood or something like that instead of trying to 3D print.
I believe Lindsay also has a laser for that.
Yeah. There's lots of shops around now that have the CNC plasma cutters that would do a thin metal, going back to the metal template. I'm sure you could get that done pretty inexpensively somewhere. If you've already got the pattern made up, give it to them. They'll do that for you. I saw Ron Linder raised a hand. Ron?
Lindsay has everything. That's the problem. Whenever he talks to you, he can change from 1 minute to the next.
I'm not sure if everyone heard that, but Ron said that Lindsay has everything, and he's not joking. He kind of has every little tool, and yeah, which he is doing a talk tomorrow morning about some of those tools.
I have used one thing called a website called Send Cut Send for some small scale metal templates. Like I use this for like reinforcement bits or just smaller bits that I use all the time. It's a website where I could just send them a file and they would send me back the metal cut pieces. So I've used that for just the types of reinforcements that I cut all the time, and I hot cut out of Dacron or things like that. It's a little bit expensive, and I probably wouldn't use it for full size like panels and things, but for little bits, it's really useful.
Yeah.
All right, everyone, I'm going to hop out of this one for a little bit, and I'm going to run off and grab myself some lunch before the next one, which starts at 12:30, and that's with Donna Hutchins on Sharpie blending technique. Feel free to continue having a chat in here. The session will remain open, and the recording will continue until the last person leaves. So I will see some of you guys in a little bit, and hopefully we see you guys on the rest of the sessions. So enjoy. See you in a bit.
Okay, so we can all drop off unless there's more things we want to talk about, I suppose.
Just wanted to say very good presentation. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much. I've been
Thank
having
you,
a lot of.
Kevin. You did a great job.
Thank you.
Yeah. Can everybody hear me?
Yes, Ralph. Hey, you got it
Great,
working.
great. Yeah, suddenly my microphone works. I don't know why. Thanks, Kevin. That was a really nice inspirations for me. I do some things completely different, but may I try your technique on one of my next projects? That's really nice. When I saw your picture of sawing the different lines, I don't know why, but I hate zigzag. I don't like it. I don't know why. I cannot explain it. But what I try to do on most of my designs, to do it with one seam, all. What I don't like is to start and stop short seams or something like that. So I try to find a way to do it like going through a maze, yeah, and hitting every way only one time. So that could maybe a solution for your work if you do straight lines on every edge of the black, and maybe you can find a way through your maze to do it with one seam.
Yep.
Maybe it's a challenge to find, but I just posted it on the chat. I printed out this little template on my 3D printer. It's not for hot cutting. It's just for cutting with a scissor, and it's I think 3 or 4 millimeter thick, and it has a piece to hold it. And what I use with this smaller things, or what somebody said about reinforcements, they are much smaller usually. I put some spray glue on it and let it dry for a few minutes, and then it sticks on the fabric, and it cannot slide on the fabric during cutting. That helps a lot. That's very useful. And and on my current projects, I have to cut out, I can't remember, a few hundred pieces like this size, and it helps a lot if you have spray glue on it and it holds on the fabric.
Ralph, were you there in the time of Rec.Kites?
Sorry, again, please.
Were you at Rec.Kites many years ago?
I have been there years ago, yeah.
So over many years in Rec.Kites, I wrote many things and helped many people. But one thing that I said got picked up and published in Kitemakers magazine. Of everything that I wrote, they quoted just one sentence from me, and it was, "Real men use straight stitch only."
I remember that, Andrew.
Very good, very good. Thank you, Andrew.
I'm going to look out of this and go into the next one. I'll see everybody.
So does that mean that us both going to use the zigzag?
I have machines that only do straight stitch. Okay, goodbye, everyone.
Kevin?
I know it works, but you say real bad, and I'm going to say real women use the zigzag. I was forgetting about those out here.
What if we like both straight stitch and zigzag?
Yeah.
I was going to say, Jose likes a zigzag.
Sorry, what?
Jose likes zigzag. Jose Sainz. Kevin, you were talking about attaching the paper to the fabric and that to another one. This is a brayer. I don't know if you can see me.
Yes, Ken. Yeah.
And it is excellent for rolling out all those little bubbles or getting rid of stretch and such.
Yeah.
And it's used by printers. It's called a brayer.
A brayer?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. B-R-A-Y-E-R.
Okay, thank you.
Dave, I've used a spoon when desperate for the same effect.
You use what you got.
Yeah.
Including a zigzag.
Really nice too.
Okay, it looks like everyone's pretty much dropping off, so I'd suggest we disband at this point. I think do we have a break now before the next session? Or are they back to back? Yeah. Okay, because it's
A half hour till the next one starts at 3:30. Well, Eastern time.
so just enough time to get some lunch, I suppose.
That was the theory.
Thank you, Kevin.
Catch you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you all for joining.
Adios.
Thank you very much.
Thank you,
Bye.
Kevin. Great job.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Bye.
Hey, Ralph.
Thanks, Kevin.
Thank you, Kevin.
Bye.
Yeah, thank you.